It was a clean throw. The glass hit the table hard enough to ring like a gunshot bourbon, spreading across the wood and dripping onto the floor. My own table, my own house. I didn't shout, didn't move, just watched the liquid slide toward me, slow and deliberate, like the moment was taking its time to humiliate me. He sat there, my son-in-law, eyes glassy, jaw tight, waiting to see if the old man would flinch. I'd spent 30 years teaching men like him what control looks like. Tonight I learned what disrespect feels like. That was the first crack. Not in the glass, in the family. My name's Thomas Harlan. I'm 67 years old, a retired federal probation officer, and the man you're about to hear from tonight. If you're watching this, it means you've found my story. The one about what happens when patience finally runs out. Before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing this from. I want to know how far this story's traveled. Because for me it started right here, at my own dining table, on the night a glass of bourbon taught me that even good men have limits. Across from me sat Mason Drake, my son-in-law. 37, restless, used to winning arguments in sales meetings. He'd been nursing bourbon since late afternoon, each pour a little heavier than the last. My daughter Claire kept smiling. That tight, apologetic smile women learn when they're trying to keep the room from cracking. "Dad, you've barely touched your dinner," she said. "I'm saving room for quiet," I told her. Mason laughed short and sharp. Man always thinks quiet is power. He swirled his glass eyes, narrowing on me like I was some kind of courtroom he needed to conquer. "Maybe it is, when you've got a pension check coming every month." I stayed still. Stillness is a weapon most men never learn to load. He kept going. "Must be easy, huh? No boss, no pressure, just watching everyone else struggle." I let the words settle. Let them echo off the framed photos on the wall. Claire's graduation, Margaret and me on our wedding day, the dog we'd buried last spring. All those memories, staring back, asking who invited this noise into our house. Claire reached across the table, placed her hand over his. "Honey, don't start. It's Sunday." He shook her off. "I'm not starting. I'm just saying your dad's got opinions on everything. Maybe he should try working again before handing out wisdom." My fingers tightened around my fork. Then I remembered the weight of the badge I used to wear, the rooms I'd walked into, where one wrong word turned law into chaos. I set the fork down gently, like I was defusing something volatile. "Mason," I said, calm as a winter lake, "this roof you're sitting under, it's not a competition trophy. It's a refuge. Treat it like one." He smiled, slow and crooked. Refuge sounds more like a museum. Old rules, old man, old furniture. His glass was nearly empty. He lifted it slightly, just enough for the bourbon to catch the light. "Pour me another, Tom." That was the moment, the crack in the night, where everything that had been politely dying finally decided to stop pretending. So I didn't move. "You know where the bottle is." He blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? You're a grown man. Get it yourself," Claire whispered. "Please, both of you." But it was too late. There are words that pull a trigger without firing a shot. He stared at me, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. And that's when the glass left his hand. I won't describe what followed. You've heard sounds like it before. A sharp impact. A woman's gasp, the heartbeat pause that divides before from after. When silence returned, I was standing. He wasn't speaking. Claire was crying. And something inside me, something I'd been keeping polite for 9 long months, stood up straight. "I think you should go upstairs," I told them. Mason muttered something I didn't catch. Claire tugged his arm, guided him toward the staircase. He went mumbling the way drunk men mumble when they think retreat is victory. The steps creaked, the door closed, and the house finally exhaled. I stayed in the dining room. The air still smelled of bourbon and burned pride. On the wall hung the photo from Claire's wedding day, me in a gray suit, smiling beside the man who just taught me that generosity without boundaries is just surrender wearing a kind face. I looked at my reflection in the window, steady, unblinking, and whispered to no one, "Not this time." Then I did what every good officer does after an incident I documented. Phone camera timestamp lighting adjusted, a few photographs, a quiet narration tone, even facts only. Then I slid the shards into a sandwich bag, labeled it with the date. Evidence, not emotion. Upstairs, footsteps shuffled. A door clicked shut again. I could hear the pipes moan as someone turned on the shower. Claire's way of pretending normal. I brewed coffee, black. No cream, no sugar. Just the taste of resolve. That's when I heard the knock at the side door. Mrs. Alvarez, my next-door neighbor, retired ER nurse, still wearing her winter parka. I heard something, "Tom." "Everything okay? Everything's handled," I said. She studied me for a long second, eyes tracing the tension in my jaw. "Handled isn't always healed. Appreciate the concern," I told her. "Go on back, it's cold out." But she didn't move until she saw me sit down, coffee steaming in my hand, phone on the table, already open to record. Then she nodded slow and knowing and left. When the house was quiet again, I pressed record. Statement of incident, February 18th, 2024. Location 2185 Willow Bend Lane. Involved parties, Thomas Harlan, Claire Harlan Drake, Mason Drake. Alcohol present. Hostility escalating since December. Tonight it crossed a line. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I ended the recording, saved it to the cloud, and leaned back. The smell of bourbon lingered, faint and sour. I opened the kitchen drawer, took out a tape measure, stretched it across the table, and noted the distance. Old habits die faithful. Somewhere upstairs, Claire's voice rose, pleading, soft, broken. Mason answered too low to catch the words. I didn't go up. I'd spent a career stepping into rooms where people begged for a pause they hadn't earned. Tonight, I let the silence do the work. By the time the clock hit midnight, the house had gone still. I sat with my coffee until it went cold, watching the glow of the streetlight ripple across the window. At 12:07, I picked up the phone again and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in 10 years. "Naomi, it's Harlan." My voice came out low, calm. "Yeah, I know it's late. I need your help." Discreet, fast, and thorough. A pause. Then her voice sharp, as ever. "Tell me what happened." I looked at the table, at the empty chair across from me, and said the truth that had been waiting 9 months to be spoken. He crossed the line in my house. The house stayed quiet long after they went upstairs. Not peaceful, just quiet. In the way a battlefield gets quiet when the shooting stops. I sat there still, as a photograph, staring at the bourbon puddle drying into the grain of my table. In my old job, I used to tell young officers, when something breaks, don't react, record. So I did. I took out my phone, switched on the camera. The screen glowed cold blue across the room. I walked a slow circle, catching everything: the tipped chair, the wet shine on the floor, the untouched plates. I spoke into the microphone, calm and even. Incident report. February 18th. Residence of Thomas Harlan. 2 witnesses, Claire and Mason Drake. Subject intoxicated. Hostile language escalated to property damage. Property damage, that's what we'd call it. In a report. Not humiliation. Not betrayal. Property damage sounded simple. Contained. I leaned down, photographed the shards scattered across the floor, the line of liquid that had run off the edge of the table. Then I grabbed a plastic sandwich bag from the kitchen drawer, dropped the fragments inside, and wrote the die with a Sharpie. Old habits die hard. Evidence before emotion. When I finished, I poured myself coffee. The clock on the stove said 12:21. I took the first sip, standing at the sink, watching my reflection in the dark window. My hands didn't shake. That was good. The job had trained that out of me a long time ago. From upstairs came a muffled thump, maybe a door closing, maybe the sound of guilt moving too fast. I didn't care which. At 12:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who's half the reason our block still feels human. Everything okay? Heard shouting. I typed back, all calm now. Thanks for checking. She replied in less than a minute. If you need a nurse, I'm awake. That made me smile, a small one. People like her are the reason decency's still alive in this country. I went to the bathroom, flipped on the light. My reflection looked older than it had an hour ago. Not from the incident, from the realization that patience, when misread, turns into permission. I rinsed my face, pressed a cold cloth against the side where the glass had grazed. Nothing serious, but I knew the mark would show by morning. That was fine. A mark is a reminder. Back in the kitchen, I opened my laptop, created a folder labeled Drake Incident, dragged the videos, photos, and audio file inside. Cloud backup, password protected. Old school meets new rules. The house creaked in the kind of silence that makes you question every decision you've made for the past year. I walked down the hall, checking locks, light switches, routines burned in from decades of working cases that ended with the same phrase, I didn't think he'd go that far. I thought about my daughter, about how she used to laugh in this house, how she'd filled it with noise and sunlight when her mother was still alive. Now every word out of her mouth came measured, careful, like she was translating peace into a language her husband might understand. That's when I decided the waiting was over. At 6:05 a.m., I called the Columbus Police Department, gave my name, my address, a brief summary. Sir, do you need an ambulance? The dispatcher asked. No, just an officer, 2 if possible. Domestic disturbance, domestic assault, I said quietly. Unarmed, contained, evidence preserved. It wasn't the first time I'd spoken those words, but it was the first time they applied to me. While I waited, I brewed a second pot of coffee. The sunrise came in dull orange through the blinds, lighting up the dining room, like a stage no one wanted to stand on. When the patrol car pulled up, I met them on the porch. 2 officers, one young, one older. They introduced themselves, professional, respectful. I told them what happened, showed them the photos, the bag of glass. The older one, Sergeant Miles, studied me carefully. Mr. Harlan, do you want to press charges? Yes, I said. But not because of what happened tonight, because of what's been happening for 9 months. They nodded. They understood. They always do, the good ones. Upstairs, footsteps moved. The younger officer went up, firm but calm. I heard a few short exchanges, a man's voice, trying to sound in control. A woman's voice pleading for quiet. Then, the shuffle of compliance. 15 minutes later, they came down the stairs with Mason between them. He looked confused, like someone had changed the rules of a game he thought he was winning. Claire followed, pale and shaking, clutching her robe. Dad, please, she whispered. We can fix this. I didn't answer her. I kept my eyes on the man who'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. Mr. Drake, Sergeant Miles, said you'll need to come with us while we process the report. We'll contact you through your attorney once the protective order's in place. Mason tried to speak, but the sergeant raised a hand. Don't. It won't help. They guided him toward the door. He turned once, eyes full of the kind of anger that comes from realizing the old man has just changed the whole map. When the door closed behind them, the house sighed again. The kind of sigh that means something toxic has finally left the air. Claire stood there small and silent, tears streaking down her face. "I didn't want this," she said. "Neither did I answered. "But wanting peace and having peace are two different things." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just turned and walked upstairs slow steps, on tired legs. I stayed by the window watching the patrol car pull away, the flash of its lights fading into the early morning gray. The smell of bourbon still lingered faintly in the kitchen. I opened the windows, let the cold air in, and listened to it fill the house. Then I sat back down at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote the date across the top of a clean page. February 19th. New case, same address. I stared at the words until the ink dried and said the only thing that made sense: game on. By sunrise, the bourbon stain on my table had gone dull and sticky, like it wanted to be forgotten. I wasn't in the mood to forgive furniture or people. The police had taken Mason downtown around 6:40 a.m. The house felt lighter, without him air easier to breathe, but I'd learned over the years that relief is only the first act. Paperwork is the second. At 8:00 sharp, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sergeant Miles, again, hat under his arm, expression steady. Judge signed the temporary protection order. At 7:15, he said, handing me a folder thick with carbon copies, effective immediately. He can't come within 500 feet of you or this property. He placed a second document on top of property transfer notice for firearms. Mason owned a handgun licensed. It would stay locked up at the station until the court said otherwise. I signed where he pointed. The signatures felt heavy, each one, nailing down a part of the truth I'd been trying not to see. "I'll have a locksmith here in an hour," I told him. "You know somebody?" "I know the best." Walt Dempsey arrived at 9:05. Vietnam vet, 70 years old, moves like time owes him money. He'd been changing locks for half our neighborhood since before Wi-Fi existed. "What happened, Tom?" he asked quietly while unrolling his tools. Temporary guests overstayed their welcome. He grunted, sympathetic, but not prying. "Happens more than you'd think." The old brass cylinders hit the trash bin with a dull clang. New deadbolts clicked in stainless steel, key-coated firm enough to stop a tank. Watching him work, I felt something settle inside me. Boundaries have a sound metal sliding home. While Walt packed up a white county sedan, pulled to the curb, out stepped a young woman in a gray blazer holding a clipboard. "Mr. Harlan." "That's me. I'm Caitlin Reese, clerk for Judge Navarro. I'm serving the protective order copy to your resident, Mr. Mason Drake. He's still in processing at county lockup, so this is just procedural." I nodded. "Does he sign for it?" "Yes, sir. Required by statute." I liked statutes. They never lied, never forgot, never asked for forgiveness. Before she left, she paused. "The judge authorized a stay-away modification. That means you can request officers to escort you if property retrieval becomes an issue," noted, I said. "And thank you." When the house went quiet again, I walked into the kitchen. The table sat bare, except for the folder Miles had given me. The official seal at the top looked clean, permanent. There's a strange peace that comes with paperwork, the kind built not from forgiveness, but from formality. I poured another coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Dog walkers, delivery vans, the school bus, coughing exhaust down the block. The world moves on no matter who just lost their balance. The phone buzzed at 9:42. "Claire." "Dad, they're releasing him this afternoon," she said, voice thin. "Fragile. I know." They said, they said he can't come here. He's furious. Says you ruined his life. He did that himself, I said. Long silence on the line. Then quieter. What happens now? Now I told her we let the law do its work, and you decide which side of it you want to stand on. I heard a soft sound, half sigh, half sob, and then the line went dead. I closed my phone, set it beside the coffee, and stared at the driveway until the heat lines started to shimmer. At 10:10, bank manager Denise Wu called. Mr. Harlan, we flagged an attempted HELOC application yesterday afternoon. Someone tried to open a home equity line in your name. Our fraud team froze it. My stomach didn't drop. It just clenched, slow and deliberate. Do you have a timestamp? 5:43 p.m., sir. In-branch application. We have camera footage. Send it to my email. I ended the call, opened my laptop, and waited for the attachment. It arrived within minutes, grainy but clear enough. The frame showed a man at the bottom counter, baseball caps, low surgical mask, still hanging from one ear. Even blurred, I knew that profile. I'd studied it for 9 months across my dinner table. I leaned back, exhaled once. So that's what you were doing while I made dinner. The rage didn't come not hot anyway. It came cold, controlled, the kind of cold that keeps you precise. By noon, I'd printed 3 copies of the footage and stapled them to my incident log. Evidence folder updated. Then I called attorney Paul Merrick, an old colleague from my probation days, now a quiet legal veteran with a voice like gravel. Tom, he said after hearing me out, you documenting this, every detail. Good. Because a man like him doesn't just drink too much, he plans too much. We'll draft the civil complaint. Once the criminal side's stable. Appreciate it. One more thing, he added. Get your financials firewalled. Credit freeze, password changes, new notary locks. Already done. Habit. When I hung up, I walked to the hallway mirror. The small mark near my temple had turned faint purple. It would fade soon, but I didn't want it to. Not yet. It reminded me that every choice has a cost. At 2:20 p.m., Claire texted again. He's out. They gave him the paperwork. He's saying you set him up. I replied with one line. Truth doesn't need setup. Then I silenced the phone and went about my afternoon. Laundry, dishes, little normal things that help keep a man from turning bitterness into identity. Around $500, Mrs. Alvarez stopped by again with a small Tupperware of soup. You look tired, she said gently. Long night. I heard. Miles told my son you handled it right. Not everyone does. Handling it right doesn't feel good, I said. She nodded. No, but it feels clean. After she left, I ate the soup standing at the counter. The taste of salt and garlic grounded me. By evening, the shadows stretched long across the floorboards. I sat in the living room folder, open on my lap, reading through every page until I reached the line with my signature petitioner, Thomas A. Harlan. That's when I realized something simple, something brutal. When you sign your name to your own protection order, you're not declaring war. You're drawing a map back to dignity. The phone rang again. Naomi Price, the private investigator I'd called the night before. You still need me, she asked. More than ever, I said. What are we looking for? Everything. Finances, debts, co-workers, patterns. And Naomi moved fast. He's clever enough to hide, but not smart enough to cover all his tracks. Her voice came back steady. Got it. I'll start tonight. After I hung up, I stepped onto the porch. The winter air bit at my skin, but it felt clean. Across the street, the lights in Mrs. Alvarez's house glowed warm through the curtains. Normal life still happening. I took a slow breath and whispered to the night, You made your move, Mason. Now, It's my turn. And for the first time in months, I locked the door behind me and felt safe doing it. By Tuesday morning, my inbox held a single new message, subject initial findings Drake. From Naomi Price. She never used greetings, never wasted words. Inside was a short note and a link to a secure folder. Password the year you retired. Preliminary only. I'll deliver the full report in person. I typed in the password, hit enter, and the screen opened to a list of PDFs, each one labeled neat, methodical credit history, employment, financial assets, personal statements. I poured black coffee, clicked the first file, and let the numbers tell their story. 7 credit cards, all maxed, minimum payments $100 a month, past due on 3. That wasn't a surprise. Men like Mason wear their lifestyle like armor, leased trucks, boutique sneakers, fancy whiskey. It's not about comfort. It's about projection. The second file, employment, sales associate, Midwest Climate Supply. Commission-based average income last year $61,000, now down to $36,000. 3 customer complaints. In Q4, aggressive demeanor, poor follow-up, inappropriate comments. Supervisor's note, from February, behavioral issues, possible alcohol dependency. I scrolled through the pages, slowly sipping my coffee. It tasted better the more I read. Then came the third file, financial assets, and my pulse steadied in that way it used to before an interrogation. Joint checking account with Claire, balance $412. Her individual retirement account, $403. Fidelity plan. 3 recent withdrawals, $6,200. In December, $4,800. In January, $3,000. In February, total $49,000, all authorized through an IP address registered to my Wi-Fi network. Sounds that stopped me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, remembering the nights he'd spent checking work emails in my den, while Claire read in bed. Remembering the questions he'd asked me about my online banking habits. Casual, friendly. I'd thought he was making conversation. He was gathering intelligence. I called Naomi. She picked up on the first ring. Morning, Tom. You reading? I am. The withdrawals, can you confirm whose credentials? Yours, number, Claire's. Yes. 2-factor codes. Texted to her phone. But guess who activated message forwarding to his laptop? How deep did he go? Deep enough to make himself an authorized user on 3 of her accounts. Not illegal. If she consented, but messy to prove she didn't. And he's been deleting emails. Can you retrieve them? Already did. Her tone carried that quiet satisfaction of someone who enjoys taking apart deceit. Anything else? I asked. Yeah. You might want to sit down for this next part. I was already sitting. He's been talking at work, not just venting, planning. 3 colleagues mentioned he's been referring to you as an upcoming windfall. Called your property a retirement bonus. Said once, quote, old man won't last forever, and I'll be ready when he's gone. I let that hang there. The words settled like cold ash. You have those statements recorded, notarized, time-stamped. You'll have the transcripts when I come by tonight. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in the quiet. Some memories arrive like a punch, others like a slow tightening in the chest. I remembered the first night Claire had brought him, over his easy charm, that confident handshake, the way he'd called me sir, without irony. Margaret had still been alive then. She'd smiled at him, said he seems polite. I'd agreed. I'd wanted to believe. Now the truth lay in front of me, in a folder named after him. At 2:30 p.m. the doorbell rang. Naomi, punctual as a court summons. Tall silver hair in a low ponytail, wearing the kind of coat that hides half a dozen tools. She carried a slim leather briefcase and the faint smell of peppermint gums. Morning, Harlan. Afternoon, technically. Depends on what time you started reading. She followed me to the dining room. I noticed her eyes flick to the table, still showing a faint bourbon stain now sanded smooth and polished over. Evidence and restoration in one piece of furniture. She laid the briefcase down, unzipped it, and began setting out papers, like a magician revealing her cards. Everything you saw online, plus witness transcripts, surveillance stills, and one thing you didn't know you needed. What's that? She slid forward a printed email thread between Mason and a man named Craig Knoll. The subject line read, "Power of Attorney Draft Confidential." I skimmed. Craig was a notary for hire working out of a UPS store. Mason had asked for a template that would authorize a family member to manage financial and healthcare decisions in case of incapacity. The draft listed Thomas A. Harlan as the grantor, Mason L. Drake as the representative. He hadn't just been stealing. He'd been preparing to inherit early. Naomi watched my expression shift. "You seeing what I'm seeing, yeah?" "A preemptive strike." She nodded. "He never filed it. But he was close. Probably waiting until you were indisposed." That word. Indisposed. A polite way of saying dead or useless. I stacked the papers, carefully lined the edges until they matched. Then I said, "He thought he was playing a game. I'm just changing the rules." Naomi smiled slightly. "You sure you want to keep this quiet? It's good leverage if he fights the charges." "Not leverage," I said. "Evidence. And evidence waits for the right courtroom." She zipped up her case. "You're colder than I remember, Harlan. I'm older than you remember." When she left the house, went silent again. I stood at the window watching her car disappear down Willow Bend Lane, the streetlights flickering on in her wake. Then I looked back at the table. The old oak gleamed under the lamplight, no trace of the bourbon that had started all this. Just a surface, smoothed by patience and sandpaper. I opened a new document on my laptop and typed one sentence at the top. He planned my disappearance before I planned his downfall. Then I hit save. At 6:00 p.m., the phone rang again. It was Attorney Merrick. "I've read the preliminary file you forwarded," he said. "We're past simple assault. This borders on financial exploitation of a protected adult." "Protected adult?" He chuckled dryly. "That's legalese for senior citizen. Congratulations, you've just become a case study in elder fraud. Glad to be useful. I'm drafting motions. You'll need to decide civil, criminal, or both." "Both," I said. "Thought so." "You've still got that prosecutor's patience." "Not patience," I corrected. "Purpose." After the call, I sat in the dim kitchen with the folder open beside me. The clock ticked loud against the quiet. Outside, snow had started to fall soft and slow, covering the sidewalks like a clean sheet over a messy bed. I thought of Margaret again. Her voice, the way she used to say, "Don't let the bad ones rent space in your head, Tom." She'd been wrong about one thing. Some tenants you have to evict publicly, so everyone knows why. Tomorrow I'd visit the courthouse. Tonight I'd sleep, knowing I finally had proof. I turned off the light, leaving the folder on the table, like a loaded weapon. The label Naomi had printed in neat black letters read, "Drake, Evidence." I smiled at that. Evidence was always my favorite word. It meant truth had finally shown up. I'd written hundreds of reports in my life, each one stamped, filed, archived, forgotten. But the document I signed that Thursday morning wasn't just another report. It was a message one my daughter would have to read someday, whether she liked it or not. The courthouse smelled like coffee, bleach, and tired people. I'd been there 1,000 times before, back when I wore a badge. This time, I was just a man in a clean jacket, carrying a folder labeled Estate Revision. Harlan Thomas A. Attorney Paul Merrick met me in the hallway. 70 now. Gray suit, heavier than I remembered, but his handshake still had weight. "You sure about this, Tom?" "Sure enough to write it down." He led me into his office, a narrow room, lined with casebooks and old courtroom photos. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a thermos that looked older than both of us. So he said, settling behind his desk, "You want a conditional inheritance clause. Unusual, but not illegal." "Nothing illegal about protecting your legacy," I said. He nodded. "You're leaving everything to your daughter-house pension insurance, unless she remains married to the man currently under a criminal protective order." "That's right. And if she stays married, it all goes to charity. The Ohio Coalition Against Domestic Abuse." Margaret would have liked that. Paul sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You know this isn't revenge. Not legally, but it's going to feel like it." "It's not revenge," I said, stirring my coffee without sugar. "It's education. I'm teaching my daughter that love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender." He studied me over the rim of his cup. "You always did have a way with words, counselor." "Old habits," I said. We spent the next hour hammering out language precise enough to survive scrutiny. Lawyers are surgeons of meaning cut too deep, and you bleed empathy. Stay too shallow, and you leave infection behind. Clause by clause, we built the will like a fortress. Claire inherits all assets, only if legally divorced from Mason Drake before my death. Any attempt by Mason to influence, challenge, or delay the execution of the will automatically voids his spouse's claim. The estate in that case transfers to the designated nonprofit. All legal fees prepaid and protected. When we finished, Paul printed the draft and handed me a pen. "Once you sign this, there's no going back." "I've been gone long enough already," I said. The pen felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was just the ink carrying 30 years of patience. I signed once, again, then initialed the final page. Paul notarized it, his old hands steady as ever. "It's done," he said quietly. He slid the sealed envelope toward me. "Would you like copies 3? I said. "One for you, one for the vault, one for me, and a letter to your daughter." I nodded and pulled a single page from my folder, typed dated unsigned at the bottom. The words were simple. "Claire, I've made some updates to my estate. You'll need to consult an attorney to understand the details. Don't be afraid of them. They exist to protect you. Everything I'm doing for that reason." Dad Paul read it and smiled faintly. "Cold letter. Warm intent," I said. He sealed the envelope himself, applied certified postage, and slid it across the desk. "Mail it yourself. She should get it directly from you." When I stepped outside, the cold air bit through my jacket, sharp and honest. I walked the 2 blocks to the blue postbox on the corner and stood there for a moment with the envelope in my hand. It wasn't just paper. It was the line between love and lesson. I dropped it through the slot. The metallic clang echoed like closure. Walking back to my truck, I noticed how ordinary the world looked. People carrying groceries, teenagers laughing into phones, a bus driver waving at someone he knew. My life had turned into a courtroom drama, but the rest of the world kept its own schedule. That's the funny thing about justice. It only feels cinematic to the people inside it. At home, I placed my copy of the will in the safe, behind the bookshelf, right where I'd kept Margaret's wedding ring after she passed. Then, I sat down at the table, the same table that had started it all, and let my eyes rest on the wood grain. No stain, no mark. Just the faint outline of where the bourbon had been. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Harlan. A young voice professional. "This is Officer Riley from Franklin County Probation Services. I'm handling Mr. Drake's supervision file. You're listed as the protected party." I wanted to inform you that he's been ordered to complete an alcohol treatment evaluation. Good, I said. There's also a financial disclosure requirement. We'll be cross-checking his assets for restitution eligibility. Interesting. Do you have reason to believe he's concealing assets? I have proof, I said. And when the time's right, you'll have it too. He hesitated, caught off guard by my tone. Understood, sir. Thank you for your cooperation. After the call, I sat for a long while in the quiet. The will, the letter, the sealed documents, they were more than legal strategy. They were a mirror showing who I'd become since all this began, not a man seeking vengeance, but a man refusing erasure. Around 6, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Alvarez, again holding a small loaf of banana bread. You look like you could use something sweet, she said. Sweet's not my thing, I told her. Then call it comfort, she replied, pushing it into my hands. I saw the police car earlier. You did the right thing, Tom. Sometimes the right thing just feels wrong at first. She left before I could answer. I placed the bread on the counter, still warm, still wrapped in foil. Margaret used to bake the same kind. For a moment, the kitchen smelled like a life I missed, more than I could admit. Later that night, as the furnace hummed and the house settled into its winter rhythm, I sat in my recliner with the lights low. The safe behind the bookshelf clicked shut, the paperwork sealed, and I whispered into the dark, not revenge, responsibility. I thought of Claire opening that letter in a few days, her confusion, her hurt, maybe even her anger. But eventually I hoped she'd see what I meant, that a man's true legacy isn't what he leaves behind, it's what he refuses to tolerate. The Marston County Courthouse had always been 2 bright white marble floors that reflected judgment from every angle. I'd walked those halls for decades, back when I was the one asking the questions. Now, I was just another name on the docket. State of Ohio. Vers. Mason Drake. Simple assault misdemeanor. Case 20 VCR 412. I arrived 15 minutes early, old habit. The hallway outside courtroom 3 smelled like stale coffee and dusted paperwork. A young clerk in a gray blazer checked my ID, offered a polite nod, and gestured me to the benches along the back wall. I didn't sit right away. I needed to feel the room first, the way you gauge a storm before it hits. The prosecutor was a woman half my age, sharp eyes, hair pulled tight. She carried her folders like loaded guns. Across the aisle, Mason sat beside his public defender, fidgeting with his cuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, his arrogance stripped clean by fluorescent lighting. His suit didn't fit. It wasn't even his. When he finally saw me, his lips tightened, jaw flexing like he was chewing down a curse. I just looked back, steady, unblinking. A star has power when it carries the truth. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." Judge William Crow entered, a man I'd once cross-examined alongside years ago. His eyes flicked across the room, paused on me, then moved on. No favoritism. Crow ran his courtroom like a chessboard. The proceedings started simple. Charges read. Plea acknowledged. Mason's lawyer stood, voice slick and tired. Your Honor, the defendant wishes to enter a plea of guilty to the reduced charge of disorderly conduct. Crow adjusted his glasses. The state's position. The young prosecutor rose, calm as still water. Your Honor, the evidence includes physical injury, corroborating photographs, and a police report with eyewitness testimony. We agreed to the reduction only under the condition of full accountability, probation, restitution, and completion of anger management. Crow nodded once. Accepted. He turned to Mason. Mr. Drake, do you understand what you're admitting to? Yes, Your Honor. His voice trembled. And that this plea means you accept full responsibility for your actions against Mr. Harlan? Mason hesitated. His lawyer nudged his arm. Yes, Your Honor. Kraut's tone stayed even, but I knew that voice. It was the sound of a man who'd heard too many excuses. You'll receive 12 months supervised probation, a $30,000 fine, and mandatory enrollment in a certified behavioral program. Miss a session, fail. A payment, violate a condition, you go to jail. Clear? Yes, Your Honor. Good. Now, before sentencing is entered, I'll allow the victim a statement. Mr. Harlan. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 70 years in my knees, but not in my voice. Thank you, Your Honor. I looked at Mason, then at the judge. I spent 30 years watching men justify harm with words like accident, mistake, or stress. But what happened in my home wasn't an accident. It was disrespect, given permission to grow teeth. The room stayed silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. I'm not asking for punishment, I said. I'm asking for understanding. There's a difference. Punishment ends when the gavel drops. Understanding lasts longer. Maybe long enough to keep it from happening again. Judge Crow nodded slowly. Expression unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. Statement will be entered into record. I sat down. Mason wouldn't meet my eyes now. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, hands locked together. Then, as Crow began to finalize sentencing, Mason's control cracked. This is ridiculous, he burst out. It was an argument. He's making me out like a criminal. For one stupid mistake, Crow's gavel slammed once. Mr. Drake, one more word out of turn, and I revoke the plea bargain. Understood. Mason froze, color draining from his face. Yes, Your Honor. Crow leaned forward, voice like steel, scraping across marble. You don't get to decide how your actions felt to someone else. That's not how this works. Silence again. The kind that rearranges a man's pride. Sentence stands, the judge said, signing the document. Probation effective immediately. When the bailiff guided Mason toward the exit, I caught one last glance. His eyes weren't angry now. They were afraid. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. Maybe sorry. Maybe you'll regret this. It didn't matter anymore. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed in the cold sunlight. The prosecutor joined me briefly, file in hand. He'll have a hard time keeping a job with this on record, she said. He earned that, I replied. She nodded once, professional but human. For what it's worth, your statement. I wasn't speaking for him, I interrupted. I was speaking for my daughter. She understood. They always do. That afternoon, I drove home on the long route through back roads lined with bare trees. Winter light has a way of showing every imperfection. Cracks in the asphalt, dust on the windshield, lines around a man's eyes. I welcomed it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, quiet but not empty, secure, like a wound finally clotting. On the counter sat a small package from the clerk's office, protective order copy certified. The stamp glared red against the beige envelope. I opened it carefully, unfolded the paper, and read the line that mattered most. Respondent ordered to maintain 500 feet distance from petitioner and his property at all times. I pinned it inside my study drawer, right above the old family photos. For the first time since February, I slept without locking the bedroom door. When dawn came, the world smelled like frost and forgiveness. I made coffee, watched sunlight crawl across the kitchen tile, and thought about what the judge had said. Understanding lasts longer than punishment. He was right, because punishment was done. Understanding was just beginning. Somewhere in a dingy apartment across town, Mason was waking up to a probation schedule, a fine, and a future full of locked doors. Somewhere, Claire was trying to reconcile the man she'd married with the one the court just described. And me, I was learning that dignity isn't something you protect once. It's something you rebuild every morning, brick by brick. I took one slow sip of coffee and whispered into the empty kitchen, "This isn't the end, son. This is the beginning of you realizing who I am." Then I smiled, small, quiet, the kind you don't earn from victory, but from peace. 3 days after the sentencing, the mail slot clanked against the front door. I wasn't expecting anything, at least nothing that could change the air in that house, the way this envelope did. Return address, Franklin County Clerk of Estates. Recipient Claire Drake. I'd mailed it myself 5 days earlier. The letter, the one that would land like a quiet grenade in my daughter's life. For a moment I just looked at it, lying there on the entry table, stamped and official. I could almost hear Margaret's voice whispering from memory, "Tom, you've always believed truth should hurt a little, but make sure it heals more than it burns." That afternoon, I knew the letter would be in Claire's hands, and I knew exactly what would happen next. Claire's apartment sat 3 miles away in a sun-bleached complex that smelled of asphalt and recycled air. She was sitting at the kitchen counter when the mail carrier slid the certified envelope under her door. She'd been paying bills, late ones. The red letters had started to multiply. Mason had promised he'd catch up, but promises don't pay rent. When she saw the envelope, her pulse jumped. Dad's handwriting. She thought of our last conversation, tense, formal, cold. She hadn't spoken to me since the day of the hearing. She turned the envelope over twice before opening it. The seal cracked sharply in the stillness. Inside was one page, short, unapologetic. "Claire, I've made some updates to my estate. You'll need to consult an attorney to understand the details. Don't be afraid of them. They exist to protect you. Everything I'm doing for that reason. Dad." No explanation, no affection, just the kind of clarity that could mean anything or everything. She read it twice, then 3 times, until the words blurred. Her mind ran circles around possibilities. What did he change? Why now? Was it punishment? Protection? When Mason came home that evening, the letter was still sitting on the counter, unfolded like an accusation. "What's that?" he asked, loosening his tie that no longer matched the job he didn't have. "From my father." Her tone was flat, cautious. He picked it up, read it, and his face darkened. "Estate updates. What does that mean?" "I don't know." He threw the page onto the counter. "You do know. He's cutting us off." "Maybe not. Maybe it's punishment," Mason snapped. "He wants you to pick sides again. That's what this is. He's manipulating you." Claire looked at him. For a long second, really looked. The man pacing in her kitchen wasn't the confident charmer she'd fallen for. He was thinner now, twitchier. Desperation had replaced ego, and it didn't fit him well. "Maybe he's protecting me," she said quietly. From what? She didn't answer. The silence stretched heavy as the Ohio winter pressing against the window. He sighed, switching tactics. "Look, we don't know what's in that will. Let's not overreact. I'll call a lawyer, see if we can request disclosure." She nodded mechanically, but her mind was already elsewhere. I'd written that line for a reason. Consult an attorney. I wanted her to find out the truth on her own. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Mason's slow snoring beside her, and thought about her father's face, the day of the trial, still calm, unreadable, not vengeful, certain. By morning she'd made a decision. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then instinct told me it wasn't a solicitor, Mr. Harlan. "This is Anna Morales, family attorney for Mrs. Claire Drake. She's retained me for estate consultation. Would you be available for verification of a will revision?" I smiled quietly inwardly. "Of course, Ms. Morales. Everything's on file with Attorney Merrick. He can verify authenticity. Thank you. I'll advise her accordingly. That was all. The shortest call of the week, but the most important one. The seed had been planted. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and a notepad. The sun had gone down behind the row of birch trees, painting the sky the color of burnt copper. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez watered her azaleas. The world kept turning. I'd spent a lifetime prosecuting people who thought they could cheat consequences. Mason Drake was just another one of them, except this time the consequences weren't delivered by a judge. They were delivered by me. I wrote in the notepad one sentence at a time, careful and deliberate. Justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs a paper trail and a conscience that refuses to stay quiet. When I looked up again, headlights swept across the driveway. A car pulled up. Claire's. She stepped out slowly, clutching a folder in one hand. Her expression wasn't angry. It was searching. "Dad," she said from the bottom of the porch steps. "You changed your will." "I did." "Why?" I gestured to the chair beside me. "Because love without consequences isn't love, sweetheart. It's permission." She didn't sit. "You think I'd choose him over you. I think you already did." That hit her. I saw it in her shoulders, the way she looked down before speaking. "You don't understand. He's trying. He's in therapy." "He's broke," I interrupted. "Jobless. And already calling lawyers about my estate. Tell me, Claire, do you really think therapy is what he wants? Or a payout?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. "I'm not trying to control you," I said softly. "I'm trying to leave you something worth inheriting. Pride, safety, peace." She swallowed hard. "You made my inheritance conditional." "Yes. If I stay married, I get nothing." "Not nothing," I said. "You get the life you've chosen." The night went very still after that. Just the sound of crickets and the faint hum of the streetlight. Claire finally sat down, setting the folder on her lap. "Do you ever wish Mom were here every day? She'd tell you to forgive. She'd tell me to protect you," I said quietly. "And that's what I'm doing." She didn't answer. We sat in silence until the air grew cold. When she finally stood, she didn't say goodbye, just looked at me one last time, eyes red, and walked back to her car. I watched the taillights fade into the distance and whispered to no one, "Someday, you'll understand this wasn't punishment. It was preparation." Inside the house felt heavier, like memory itself was pacing the floorboards. I went to the study, opened the drawer, and touched the edge of the sealed will. She'd seen the seed. Now, it was up to her to let it grow. 2 weeks passed. February slipped into March. The snow thawed into dirty water, and my daughter's silence stretched longer than I'd hoped, but shorter than I'd expected. When the phone finally rang that morning, I didn't check the caller ID. I just knew. "Dad," she said. Her voice was low, hollow, stripped of the forced brightness she used to wear like makeup. "I need to talk to you. Alone." "Name the place," I said. "Diner on Hudson Noon." She hung up before I could say, "I'll be there." The diner hadn't changed in 30 years. Red vinyl booths, a jukebox that hadn't worked since Reagan, the smell of burnt coffee and nostalgia. I got there early like I always did, sat facing the door. Old habits die hard when you've spent half your life reading faces for lies. Claire came in 5 minutes late. No makeup, no ring. Eyes red from crying, or lack of sleep, probably both. She slid into the booth across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she didn't drink from. "He's gone," she said simply. Gone. How packed his things. Said he needed space. He hasn't called in 4 days. I didn't ask where he went. I already knew. Men like Mason always run back to the shadows that made them. Good, I said quietly. She gave a bitter little laugh. Good. You sound almost happy about it. Relieved, I corrected. There's a difference. Her eyes hardened. You don't even ask if I'm okay. I already know you're not. You wouldn't be here if you were. The waitress came by, poured coffee for both of us. Neither of us said thank you. Claire pulled a folder from her purse, thinner than the one she'd carried the last time. I called that lawyer again. The one you mentioned, Merrick. He let me read your will. I nodded. I assumed you would. Her voice shook, but her words came sharp. You tied my life to a divorce decree, Dad. You turned love into a legal contract. I turned blindness into a choice, I said. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. You really think that's love? Putting conditions on it? I think love without self-respect isn't love. It's charity. And charity never saved anyone who didn't want saving. She fell quiet, tracing a circle on the table with her finger. Then she said softly, He took money from me. I didn't move. How much? 15,000. From my retirement. He said he'd replace it. Her laugh cracked like glass. He replaced it with debt. I watched her face as the realization hit the betrayal she'd tried so hard to deny, now sitting squarely in front of her. You already knew, didn't you? She asked. Yes. Her hand went to her mouth. How long? Since before the trial. I hired a private investigator. I wanted evidence, not suspicions. You spied on us. I protected you, I said evenly. Her voice trembled, now thin and wounded. You didn't trust me enough to let me see it for myself. You weren't ready to see it. She stared down at the table again. He called you manipulative. Coming from him, I'll take that as a compliment. She looked up, eyes wet but steady. You wanted this to happen, didn't you? You wanted me to hit rock bottom so I'd come back. No, I said quietly. I wanted you to hit clarity. For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the kitchen griddle. Somewhere in the back, someone laughed too loud, the sound painfully ordinary. Then she said something I didn't expect. He told people at work you'd leave me the house when you died, that it was just a matter of time. I nodded once. I know. Her lips parted. You know, his co-workers gave statements. He called it his investment strategy. He was waiting me out. She went pale. He talked about you dying openly, smiling. She pressed her napkin to her mouth, fighting a sound that wasn't quite a sob. My God. I reached across the table, laid my hand over hers. That's who you were trying to save. She didn't pull away. She didn't squeeze back either. Just sat there letting the truth settle like dust after an explosion. After a minute, she said, What happens now? That depends on you. She exhaled shakily. I filed for legal separation yesterday. I haven't told him yet. I don't even know where he is. You just took your first real breath in months, I said softly. Her eyes met mine, wary, exhausted, but sharper than I'd seen them in a long time. You make it sound like freedom. It is, I said. Freedom rarely feels good at first. It feels like loss. The waitress dropped the check between us. I paid it without looking like I'd done since she was 16. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of wet asphalt. We stood by her car, both of us unsure what to say. Dad, she said finally, voice small. How do you do it? How do you stay so calm? Calm's a trick, I said. It's just anger that learned to stand still. She smiled through the tears. Mom used to say that about you. I know. For the first time in a year, she hugged me. It wasn't long or dramatic, just two tired people holding on, because there was nothing left to argue about. When she pulled back, She said he's not coming back this time. I think I finally believe you. I never needed you to believe me, I said. I just needed you to believe yourself. She nodded slowly. You win, Dad. It's not a contest, I told her. It's a homecoming. That night back at the house, I sat at the table again. The same one that had seen bourbon, blood, and paperwork. Now, it just held peace and 2 coffee cups. I replayed our conversation, every word, every pause. There's a strange ache that comes when you realize you've finally been proven right, because being right in family matters usually means someone you love had to hurt first. The phone buzzed once. A text from Claire. Thank you. I'm sorry it took me this long. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. You were never late, just delayed by love. Then, I set the phone down, leaned back, and listened to the quiet. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted by anger. It just felt alive again, breathing, waiting, ready. The day she told me she'd filed for divorce, the air smelled like rain, about to fall, that metallic tension before a storm finally lets go. It was early April. The magnolia tree in the front yard had just started to bloom, white petals littering the walkway like confetti after a quiet parade. I was sitting on the porch with the morning paper when her car pulled up. She stepped out slowly, carrying 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Her eyes were tired, but her face looked lighter than it had in months. Relief has a shape, and it was written in the way her shoulders no longer slumped. I stood. You're home, I said simply. She nodded, a small breath, leaving her lips like surrender. If you'll have me. Always. I carried the bags upstairs to the guest room that hadn't been a guest room for weeks. I'd already painted the walls a pale blue. She didn't know that. I'd done it the night after our diner talk, when I realized she might need this space sooner than later. When she walked in, she froze. You repainted. Fresh start, I said. She set the box on the bed. Inside were a few framed photos, a stack of papers, a faded cardigan her mother used to wear. Not much, just the essentials you carry when you're done living in someone else's shadow. I filed this morning, she said, voice quiet, but certain. It's official. The attorney said 60 days until final. I nodded. How'd he take it? He didn't say much, just looked small. She hesitated. You don't hate him, do you? I thought about that. Hate is easy. It burns quick and leaves nothing useful behind. What I felt was colder, cleaner. I don't waste hate on men like that, I said. I just don't think about them anymore. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she let on. That evening we ate together for the first time since before the trial. I'd cooked stew, the kind Margaret used to make when the nights were long and the world felt heavy. The smell of thyme and slow-simmered beef filled the kitchen. And for a while, silence felt like peace, not punishment. Halfway through dinner, she said softly, I kept waiting for him to change. We all do, I said. That's how good people get hurt. Mistaken potential for proof. She stirred her spoon in the bowl. Do you ever wish you could go back, do things differently every day? I said. But wishing is just regret, dressed up nice. What matters is what we do after. She smiled faintly. You sound like a preacher. No, I said. Just an old man who's run out of excuses. Over the next few days, the house began to feel like itself again. Her laughter started coming back, in fragments, small, careful but real. I'd hear her on the phone with her lawyer, talking about documents, settlements, clean starts. No fear in her voice anymore, only focus. Then, on the 6th morning, she walked into the kitchen, holding a letter. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable. It's from him, she said. I didn't move. What does he want? She opened it, unfolded the page, and read aloud, "Claire, I'm sorry for how things ended. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You know, I never meant to hurt you or your father. I'm getting help. Please don't do this to us. We can fix it. You're all I have left. No threats, no insults, just manipulation disguised as remorse." I watched her face as she read. No tears this time, just quiet understanding. She folded the letter neatly and dropped it into the trash. "That chapter's done," she said simply. I felt something unclench inside me. "Good," I said. "Let him live in the story he wrote for himself." She smiled faintly. "You really do believe in justice, don't you?" "Justice," I said, "isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about clarity." Later that week, she started working again, freelance editing, something she could do from home. The routine suited her. The hum of her laptop became the new sound of peace in that house. One afternoon, she came into my study holding a cup of coffee. "I talked to Mom's old friend Patricia," she said. "She runs that domestic violence shelter downtown. They're short on volunteers." I looked up. "You're thinking of helping." "I'm thinking it's time to turn pain into something useful," she said. That was the moment I knew my daughter was coming back to herself, not the fragile version I'd tried to protect, but the strong one her mother had raised. On Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a sheriff's deputy stood there holding a clipboard. "Delivery for Mr. Harlan," he said. "Certified notification." I signed and took the envelope. It was from the Franklin County Superior Court, final divorce decree, effective immediately. I brought it upstairs, knocked on her door. She looked up from her laptop when I handed it over. "This is it," I said. She read it, eyes scanning the lines, the legal words that now meant freedom. When she reached the end, she exhaled like someone surfacing from deep water. "It's really over," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "And now, you get to decide what begins." That evening, we sat out on the back porch, with coffee, watching the sky turn amber over the trees. The cicadas had started early, their hum filling the quiet, like background music to our new life. She said, "I keep thinking about how Mom used to tell me pain teaches best when it's done talking." I didn't get it until now. I smiled. She was wiser than both of us combined. She looked at me for a long moment. "You know, when I first got your letter, I thought it was cruel. But now I see it was the only thing that could have pulled me out." "That letter wasn't about cruelty," I said. "It was about boundaries. Sometimes the only way to wake someone up is to show them where the door really is." She reached over, placed her hand on mine. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand gently. "That's what fathers do. We hold the line until our children remember how to stand on their own." The last of the sunlight disappeared behind the trees. For the first time in months, the night felt warm instead of heavy. I thought of Margaret, of all the nights she used to sit right where Claire was, now smiling, saying, "You two are more alike than you realize." She'd been right. The porch light flickered on automatically. Claire leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed, peaceful. The storm had finally passed. The house, the family, the silence, all rebuilt, piece by piece. And somewhere miles away, a man named Mason Drake was sitting in the ruins of the life he'd built on lies. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't wish him anything at all. Because true justice isn't about seeing your enemy fall. It's about standing tall enough that you no longer need to look down. By summer, the blue room upstairs no longer looked like a guest room at all. The walls gleamed soft, as dawn books lined the window ledge, and a vase of fresh lilies sat on the nightstand, her mother's favorite flower. When I passed by in the mornings, I'd hear the soft rhythm of her keyboard, the occasional laugh at something she read online. The sound felt like sunlight. That room had seen tears, silence, and rebuilding. Now, it held life again. It was a Saturday in July when the story finally closed its circle. The mail carrier dropped off 2 envelopes that morning, one thick, one thin. The thick one bore Claire's name, the thin one mine. I carried them inside, set them on the kitchen table, that same oak table that had seen everything: the bourbon, the arguments, the blood, the signatures, the redemption. When she came downstairs, her hair tied back, and coffee mug in hand, she eyed the thicker envelope. From the court. I nodded. Looks like final paperwork. Probably the decree and settlement confirmation. She tore it open with careful fingers, scanning the first page. Then she smiled, small, tired but real. "It's official," she said. "Divorce finalized. Property divided, debts settled," and her eyes widened slightly. "Dad, they ruled he's solely liable for the joint credit accounts." "Good," I said quietly. "He can carry his own weight for once." She folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and set it aside. "What's yours?" she asked, nodding toward the thinner one. I opened it. One page, simple, bureaucratic. Notification of case closure. State of Ohio. Verse Mason Drake. Probation satisfied. All conditions met. Case archived. I read it once, then set it down. "That's it," I said. "His file's closed." She studied my face. "How does it feel?" "Like a door finally locked," I said. "Not slammed, just locked." That evening we sat on the porch again, the sky bruised purple with sunset. The summer air smelled of cut grass and rain somewhere far off. She'd been quiet all day, the kind of quiet that isn't avoidance, but reflection. Finally she said, "You know, I used to think strength meant staying. Now I think it means leaving before you disappear." I nodded. "That's the hardest kind. The kind that looks like failure to everyone else." She glanced at me, a small smile tugging her mouth. "You ever think you'll forgive him?" I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Forgiveness isn't something I do for him. It's something I do to keep him from living here." I taped my chest rent-free. She laughed softly. "Mom would have liked that. She would have painted this whole house pink if she'd known how blue it'd get," I said. We sat in silence again, the kind of silence that feels earned. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler hissed to life. The world kept turning. A week later, I found a letter on the porch. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. I recognized the uneven slant immediately. Mason. I turned it over once, twice, then set it aside. Didn't open it. Didn't need to. Some words aren't meant to be read. They're meant to stay sealed reminders of where you no longer need to go. That night, I took it outside and burned it in the fire pit. The flames flared briefly, then shrank to orange whispers. The ashes drifted upward, carried by the wind toward nowhere in particular. "Goodbye," I said softly, not to him, but to the version of myself that had needed an enemy to stay standing. Claire began volunteering at the shelter 2 weeks later. I'd drive her, sometimes drop her off watch. Her walk through those glass doors with confidence she didn't even realize she'd earned. She'd come home with stories, not tragic ones, but brave ones. Women rebuilding, one paycheck, one phone call, one choice at a time. She'd tell me, "It's strange, Dad. I don't feel broken anymore, just seasoned." And I'd smile, because that's what survival really is, experience with scars. In August, on the anniversary of Margaret's passing, we visited her grave together. The sky was endless blue cicadas, humming so loud they felt like memory itself. Claire laid a lily on the headstone and whispered something I didn't hear. When she stood, She turned to me. Do you ever think Mom would be proud of us? I looked at the stone the years carved into it. I think she'd say we finally learned what love actually means. And what's that? Love, I said, isn't about never fighting. It's about never fighting alone. She smiled through her tears. You always did have a way with words. Occupational hazard, I said. We stood there for a while, just the two of us. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted, just whole. When we got home that evening, Claire disappeared upstairs to the blue room. Later, I walked by and saw her sitting at the desk, typing something with that quiet focus her mother used to have. What are you working on? I asked from the doorway. She smiled without turning around. A story. About what? About a man who taught his daughter the difference between mercy and weakness. I felt my throat tighten. Sounds like a good one. It's still being written, she said. That night, I sat alone in the living room, lights low, air conditioner humming. On the table before me lay a single photograph, Margaret, holding a 5-year-old Claire, both of them laughing so hard, the picture blurred at the edges. I traced my thumb across the frame and whispered, We did it, love. She's safe now. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, gentle and steady like approval. I leaned back in the chair and let the quiet settle. For months, I'd chased closure, justice, control. All the things men like me think, keep the world from breaking. But what I'd really found was simpler. Peace isn't something you win. It's something you allow. The blue room light went out upstairs. I heard her door click shut, her footsteps soft across the floor. I looked around the house one last time. The walls, the photographs, the polished oak table. Every scar in that place told a story. None of them were ugly anymore. They were proof we'd lived and learned and made it through. I poured one final glass of water, raised it to the empty chair across from me, and said quietly to Margaret, for her strength, to Claire for her courage, and to Peace for finally coming home. Then I drank, set the glass down, and let the night close gently around me. You spend a lifetime believing that patience keeps a family together. But sometimes, patience just teaches people how far they can push you. I used to think justice was something you handed down in a courtroom. Turns out it starts at your own table. That night, I didn't lose control, I took it back. And if there's one thing I've learned at 67, it's this: peace isn't what you wait for. It's what you protect every single day.